live. Kicking this off, I just want to say before we go any further, very, very quickly, Christianity is just fucking sad. It really is. Like, at the end of the day, it's the laziest fucking way to try and have a relationship with quote unquote God. It's like it doesn't even mean anything to them. At the end of the day, it's not a priority whatsoever. And you know that because they keep reaching for this book of somebody else's answers rather than just paying attention to the reality that they're experiencing right now, which is where God would be. And so rather than try and figure out what that means, rather than try and figure out who they are, question themselves, do the hard work, go through the discomfort of feeling uncertain, and actually start to develop some kind of sensitivity for what is and their relationship to what is. They reach for a book of what to do and what not to do. And then what's funny about it is that they defend it as the word of God, despite the fact that it contradicts itself numerous times. And so it has nothing to do whatsoever with what's in the book, so much as just having a book that they can say, no, this is the word of God, and therefore I'm right because I'm holding it. It's really sad because they go through their entire life believing in this promise of an afterlife, of heaven or hell, and they bet on this belief because they're afraid of hell, which is incredibly sad when you look at what Jesus actually said. When Jesus brings up the word hell, which of course is an English word, has nothing to do with what Jesus said, he actually was using a word that indicated a place, an actual physical place that was kind of nightmarish to live in. It was a valley at the other end of the area. I think it was called Gehenna. I think that's the word that he used originally. It wasn't hell. It had nothing to do with the afterlife because Jesus didn't believe in an afterlife. Jesus believed in eternal life here, right? So when he's talking about hell, he's talking about a state of being here that's hell-like, that's torturous, that's like a nightmare, right? And he was talking about this pit as an example. He never talked about the afterlife in the way that Christians believe because they don't actually believe in Jesus. They don't actually follow Jesus. They follow how everybody else interpreted Jesus, but only certain people, because the other people were murdered and disregarded by the Catholic or Christian church. And what's worse is Christians don't even recognize that. They don't understand that Christians weren't the original followers of Jesus. The original followers of Jesus were murdered by Christians. And yet a Christian will say, well, you should learn your history. Should I? Should I? Where do you know your history? I've met Christians who think that, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the book of John, is John the Baptist. And it's not at all. There are Christians who believe things about the Bible that have nothing to do with the Bible. There are Christians who clutch and cling to revelations and don't actually know the John that's having the revelations. It's just whatever suits their purpose. But you'll notice that there's never an argument that's actually logical. Eventually, it just breaks down. And what happens is it'll break down to, well, just let the Lord show you. Just let the Lord show you. From a person who's not doing that, who's actually clinging to some belief that was created by other people rather than letting the Lord show them. It's incredible. It really is. And it's important to recognize that it really is sad, because the only reason that we don't address it as such, the only reason we don't look at it and go, holy shit, like, you're so far from what you're looking for. Like, it really is, like, well, sad. It's the only word I've got for it. We don't look at it that way because there's a billion plus of these people, and they ruled the world for a very long time. You couldn't question them. Right. And so nobody's ever even wanted to look at the concept of God. Nobody's ever wanted to look at what the reality is, because frankly, this was the common dialogue. And that's the only reason people cling to it. Majority rules, right? Oh, it seems safe. Everybody else believes in it. My parents believed in it, so on and so forth. And it's easy, right? But it's sad. At the end of the day, it's just, It's the attempt at a shortcut towards something that if it really meant something to you, you'd just get to work and be here in the present and actually do it. Like actually look for the reality behind the concept. But yeah, I just wanted to shit on religion very quickly because it's important to do and recognize that there's nothing wrong with you shitting on religion. It should be shit on, like racism.
100%. And I feel like it really is that trade-off between the false comfort, the little bit of comfort versus the freedom. And like they're willing to just settle for the tiniest little bit of that comfort as opposed to actually continuing through and continuing to be willing to question it, because they really don't want to dig in at all. And as you said, like they say things like, let the Lord show them. And yet they're holding on to all of these words that other people said. It's like, let the Lord show you is, the reality of that would be relaxing into uncertainty, would be letting go of all of the things that you're holding on to, would be letting go of all of the things you cling to for that false certainty, the stories that you're telling yourself. And so let the Lord show you is the funniest thing that it comes to that, because that is what we're saying. Obviously, it's a contorted view, but that is what we're saying. Like, let reality show you, look at reality, pay attention to reality here and now, because that is where God resides, not the conceptual idea, but the reality of it is residing here and now. And so it's fascinating that they're willing to settle for that, because you start having a conversation with them and they just get worked up and frustrated, and it ends with just like, why do you have to do this? It helps a lot of people, it makes people feel better, it gives them like the tiniest little inkling of a cessation of discomfort, holding on to that false belief. And they're willing to take that and run with it and hold on to it and defend it and fight against anyone who just brings up one little question. Like they really don't want to dig in. And that's why it's pushed, like, don't question. Like they literally teach you in Sunday school as a kid, like, don't ask questions. It's the opposite of the curious exploration of reality, because they don't want to look any further. They feel some degree of comfort, which isn't even it, because there's still so much underlying discomfort in that spot. And you just get used to it, to the point that you think that that's what life is. And that's why we have phrases like, oh, life is suffering. Like, I get that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, like suffering just being the, doing something. But to think that, because people say that in the way of like, life sucks, like life just sucks, it's just what it is, it's, you gotta do your shit and get it over with. Like it's the fact that we even think of it in that way, think of life as a conceptual idea that's separate from us, is kind of mind-blowing. And it's all rooted around our perception of ourselves, like the story we tell ourselves. And if we can add another layer to that by saying like, I believe in this. You got to believe in something. I believe in this. I believe in this belief system that just tells me something that's just sound like the words that the reality that it's pointing to is so much different than the reality that they're experiencing and holding on to. And, it's like, if that's where you're going to settle, if that's where you're going to stop, if that's where you're going to let go of your desire to, I don't know, dig in any deeper, then it's just kind of a bummer, I guess. But yeah, I'm not.
It's an absolute bummer. It's an absolute bummer. And I say that like with love. I understand. I really do. The problem is that Christianity and all belief systems, they just offer that chance to hold on to something and go, that's the truth. And that's the problem, because it's in that you stop actually experiencing the truth, which is the rawness of the actual experience of your existence without the narrative over top. So we're stepping away from that. And then what's worse is we double down and we judge ourselves. We're like, yeah, now I'm on the path and all of you should believe what I believe, right? And we get even more divisive. And so we step farther and farther and farther away from the very thing that we're trying to get close to, which is the recognition of God, the recognition of unity. And we don't see that because, again, for the most part, it's just kind of a nice idea. Like we look at it in the same way as we look at I know, a high school track trophy. That'd be nice to have. It'd be nice to believe in God. It'd be nice to feel safe until we start getting afraid of death. And then it becomes a little bit more serious because we're like, oh, got to protect myself, got to make sure I'm in the good. And that's often the problem, is that we're just afraid. And so we want a simple solution. But it's like anything. It's like, I find it funny because a person will commit their entire life to getting good at something like, say, the guitar. And yet that same person will think that forming a relationship with whatever God is as simple as believing in Jesus. But learning the guitar takes a lifetime. And that's the point, is that we don't want it to seem like that. We don't want it to come down to, and this is again why I like the etymology of Israel, right? It's those who toil with God. It has nothing to do with who they are as a people or what they believe in or anything else. It has to do with their proximity to the reality of what's fucking happening moment to moment to moment, toiling with or as God, right? Because that's how you really get an understanding for what it or you are, right? That's it. That's the whole reality. But we try to scapegoat that. We try to shortcut that. We're just like, no, I just want to get to where I am, sinner, and I know I'm a sinner because I don't feel very good, to good with Jesus. And that's it. And unfortunately, the reality is you still got to deal with your shit. But that's all I want to escape. I want to escape that. You see, like, if I think I'm a sinner, I'm a bad person, chances are I don't think I'm ever going to deal with that in my lifetime. And I don't want to believe that I can deal with that in my lifetime, because if I do believe I can deal with that in my lifetime, I actually have to start dealing with that in my lifetime. So you see, there's a whole bunch of responsibility there. So what I do is I tell myself I can't do that. See, I can't get over my selfishness. I can't get over my greed or my judgment. I'm a sinner. But when I die, because I believe in Jesus, that'll all just go away. And I'll suddenly become a magical, godly person in heaven. It's like, you're still going to be the same asshole you are here. Isn't that funny? They're like, no, I believe in Jesus, I'm going to go to heaven. But you're a douche here. So you think you're going to die and all of the douchiness is going to get filtered out, and what's going to be left in heaven is the best version of you? You're not even willing to work for that here. It's like there's this portal you walk through, and all of a sudden all of your asshole nature is all of a sudden left behind so you can go and live with God. It's the funniest goddamn thing. They don't even think it through. It's like, if you think you're a sinner here, and the whole reason that you're afraid of dying is because you don't want to let go of who you are or who you think you are, have you even thought about what's going to happen when you get to heaven? They're not going to let a sinner into heaven. So believing in Jesus means you have to let go of all of your sin. So all of the stuff that you're attached to, that you're afraid of losing when you die, is going to leave anyway.
It is very, very interesting that we have, like, it's just like a fairy tale we kind of maintain inside our mind to think that we're going to experience all of this here now in reality. And then we get to some other spot afterwards and everything is just like amazing all the time. And we're totally different and all our suffering goes away and all of our thoughts, as if there's no potential for that to happen right now. And it almost takes away from our desire to work towards that right now, because we just settle upon that idea. But like we were talking about this last week, if you actually dig into your idea of heaven and what that experience would be like it would get very old very quick. Like, we don't even dig beyond that. Like, we barely even think about it. It's just like, oh, what happens when we die? Well, if I'm good enough, I'll probably go to heaven. And we don't think about what that's gonna be. Like, we don't look beyond what that experience would actually be like. And it's interesting. You were talking about the fear of death and how people, even if you believe in heaven, I know plenty of people who think that there's a good chance they're going to heaven. Like, there's still a massive fear of death, and yet we settle upon that. And it's like, yeah, I'm still afraid, but fingers crossed I'm right. And hey, if you don't believe and you're wrong, it's like, all right, if you didn't and there was Sky Daddy looking down, you think he would only take the ones who are like, oh yeah, I sacrificed my life? Or would he take the ones who were just living their life, toiling with God in each and every moment? Like, it's there's so many cracks to the arguments, and it's just interesting how people are willing to settle despite continuing to have that fear. So like, you would think if someone still had that fear, they would be willing to look beyond, and there's just no thought that we couldn't be afraid of death at some point. And so it's just like another thing we've settled upon is like, I'll always have a fear of death, and I definitely die. Like, even that is just an assumption. And that's something in the future too, that we kind of hold on to. Like, you're here now, but you still maintain the idea that you die because you see it around you. But like, that experience, you couldn't possibly wrap your head around what that would be, but you've settled upon an idea of what you think you are here and now. And so you see that ending, but that could end right now. Like, it doesn't have to be such a close attachment. And I guess that's what recognizing that you don't die is like seeing what that experience would actually be like, and then continuing to dig into it, continuing to question what you think you are that's causing you to think that you're something that could possibly die because of your conceptual idea that you're separate from reality. And like, it's all very much tied together, but we just settle upon the littlest cessations. Like, there's a whole mountain of things we could explore and climb. And like, as soon as you're off the ground, there's like that subtle cessation of the discomfort of that rawness of uncertainty. So we get like a step up and we're like, okay, that's good. And it's like, there's a whole nother fucking so much more to explore, so much more to dig into. And we're settling upon like the tiniest little cessation. And of course it's fragile. Of course it's something gets uncomfortable and you feel like you have to defend because it's an absurdly shallow spot to land on. It's like, oh, I just have to take Jesus in and then I'm going to heaven. And it's like, there is infinite layers of depth beyond the settling upon some religious belief or a belief in some conceptual idea of God. Like, there's so much more that's just like the tiniest little layer to dig through, and yet we'll settle upon that because it's like, and that's where we're at. Like, we'll settle for the shallowest cessation of it, and yeah, we're not willing to explore. And there's just so much under that little tiny bit that we've settled upon right now.
For sure. And it's funny because we've talked about this, how you can have this conversation for a long time. You can have this conversation for weeks or months and still not understand what's being said. And it's only because of that idea of yourself that trips you up, right? Like, as long as you believe that your idea of what you are is what you are, then you're never, ever going to be able to experience anything but the idea of yourself, and therefore the perception that everybody else thinks of themselves as an idea, right? And so when Andrew, for example, says, I'm God, or you're God, those people immediately think, Andrew is saying he's God, right? Or Andrew is telling me that I'm God, so I'm God. And immediately there's that me versus everything else. And that perspective is the mistake, or is the inaccuracy, is the distortion. See, that perspective of me versus everything else, I am God, is totally inaccurate. If that's what you're thinking that we're saying, you're very wrong. So I want to try and simplify this. Saying that I am not God is as I'm going to say that again. Saying that I'm not God is as absurd, there we go, as a cell in my body saying it's not Ray. See, the cell might perceive itself having its own experience, and it does. But for it to actually deny being part of its environment is absurd. And that is what a Christian is doing. Oh no, there's a God, but I'm not it. Like, oh, it's like my arm saying, there's a Ray, but I'm not Ray. Only according to your perspective, but the reality is, of course you are. Of course you are. You may not like it. See, that's the whole thing. You may not like the reality of what we're saying, that you are a cell within God, which is still God, because there is no division except by your experience. So what that means is that you can't just ignore everyone else and focus on yourself without there being some consequence that will come back to you because there's no division. Do you see how immediately that's uncomfortable? Whereas if there's a God, you can be a selfish asshole and just pray for forgiveness, and the ripple doesn't come back. But if it's just you and you're connected to everything, then you're responsible. And that's very uncomfortable. And so that's what we run from. We're like, no, someone's going to save me. Where's Jesus?
Exactly, because with that confusion, like the lack of the recognition that it's all you, like you're paying attention to an infinitesimally small percentage of the reality of yourself. Like when you're paying attention, when you're so caught up in your idea of yourself, you're paying it like out of the whole fucking pie, there's like a tiny little sliver that you're paying attention to. And so of course there's going to be so many consequences to that. It's as if your whole body, except for one tiny little part, was on fire, and like your pointer finger was like the one part you were paying attention, and the rest of your body was on fire. You're gonna burn, like you're gonna die very quickly. And that's what it's like paying attention to your conceptual idea of yourself, not paying attention to everything. It's not in the state of concern. It's not in a state of, concerned about everything that's happening, but just paying attention. Because if you're concerned, you're really only paying attention to you, to the tiny little sliver. That's when the concern steps in, is what does all of this that's happening, what do all of my perceptions of all of this that's happening mean about this? So you're not actually paying attention. You see, you can't simultaneously be concerned and paying attention to everything that you are. But as you don't pay attention, it's as if everything's on fire except the one little part that you're paying attention to. And so there's going to be consequences. There's absolutely going to be consequences. Of course, there would be consequences. Like if you, like anything on your body, if a part of your body was going numb and you didn't recognize it and didn't want to shake it out or whatever, and there was like, it was too long for so long, and so you tried to take a step and you're only focused on the other half of your body, you would fall down. Like you have to, in order to be involved in your experience, you have to be paying attention to all of it. Like you gotta be. And when you're lost in your idea of yourself, and then you don't, like you're not. And it's to say, like, oh man, it's crazy how all of the beliefs, any conceptual belief in anything, is not paying attention. Because like the reason that the belief steps in is because you're not paying attention to the reality of what you are. You're so lost in your idea of yourself that you feel like you need the beliefs because you're not paying attention, because you're so afraid, because you're just not involved in reality. And so that, like, the beliefs need to come in. Like someone who starts to recognize this and runs back to Christianity is just because they get so involved in themselves that they cut themselves off to the rest of reality, and then they're afraid, and then they need some sort of belief system to hold on to in order to feel a little bit better. And the only reason that it could even come up is because they stopped paying attention. The reason that someone runs back to belief is just because they stop paying attention to reality. They get caught in what everything means about them, which it doesn't, in maintaining an assumption of what it all does, and they just close themselves off. And so of course they feel afraid when they feel so divided, because they feel like they're just a tiny little piece of a massive world that doesn't see them. And so of course the ideas come up, but it doesn't take away from the fucking absurdity of it.
No, it does not. And it's interesting. I often go between the two perspectives, because on the one hand, often believers in quote unquote God are afraid, and a good portion of their belief comes from fear. Another thing that happens, unfortunately, is that they're just selfish. They're just selfish and they're self-involved, and they want to think about themselves and focus only on what they want and what's going to make them happy. And that's all it is. That's all it's meant to be. It's just meant to be. I just want to think like this. And if I believe in God, I don't have to deal with it right now. Right? Again, God's going to take care of all that. God's got a plan. There's just so much irresponsibility there. But the whole point is I can act like a selfish prick as long as there's a God out there. Right? Because it's not just on me. So I'd like to push away God through belief so I can continue to run amok. It's actually, I wrote this down. I thought this was pretty good. Christians want to be sinners so that they have an excuse to act like demons in what would otherwise be heaven. It's kind of the case, right? Like, if I'm a sinner, I don't have to act like an aware part of reality. I don't have to act in unison with everything else. So it is Sunday, and I wanted to mention that we have a guest today. We actually have Amanda joining us for this Sunday segment of Raw for the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to be chatting. Obviously, we have been kind of beating on religion a little bit this morning because, frankly, it deserves it. So we may stick in the same direction. We may not. I'm not sure where it'll go. But Amanda, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Oh my God, thank you for having me. Hi, guys. Hi, everybody. I am ecstatic to be here, which is like my usual processing power. But I have been listening to the live because it is fascinating, and I do want to share my thoughts on it, just because I have had the most incredible past couple of days, and they've had nothing to do with religion, and it has been a wholly individual kind of solitary kind of experience, and yet it has felt so unbelievably complete and full. And it's everything that I guess I was promised, from living up to expectations of other people, living up to the expectations of religion and society as a whole. And I'm like, I have none of the things. I have checked none of the boxes that they've told me I needed to check. And yet I feel so incredibly complete. And I'm just like, it felt unbelievable. So I was volunteering at an animal shelter yesterday, and I had just gone through some training. And after the training, they said, if you want to go hang out with some of the cats, go ahead. So I walk into one of the rooms. I sit immediately on the floor. One of the cats pokes its head out of the cat tower. It jumps out. It looks at me. It checks me out. It sniffs. It rubs. It gives me the sign of approval. My security application was approved, so we could commence. And the cat like hops in my lap, and I'm petting it for a little bit, and then I start crying. And I started crying because I felt so happy to be there. And I'm sitting on a floor in a shelter, touching a random cat. No one is looking at me. No one is giving me a pat on the back. No one is telling me I'm fantastic. No one is promising heaven or saying anything about an afterlife or anything about this life. And yet that moment between me and the cat felt so full and so incredibly wonderful. And I didn't want to be anywhere else. And I felt so incredibly happy and appreciative to be there, and sharing that moment with the cat. And then on my drive home, I'm crying again, because I'm like, none of this makes sense. According to religion, I'm supposed to have a husband and kids by now, and I'm supposed to be contributing to society in that way. And I'm supposed to be going to church, and I'm supposed to be praying and doing all of these things. And I'm supposed to have a close-knit relationship with my family. And I'm supposed to be checking all of these boxes, and none of these boxes are checked, everybody. Like, there is barely a relationship with, family. I barely see friends. I work from home most of the time. I live alone. There is no husband. There is no boyfriend. There are no kids. There are no pets. I spend a majority of my time alone. And yet somehow I feel so incredibly full and so incredibly complete and happy. And it is all of the things I was promised if I had done what society and religion had told me to do. And yet I felt it, despite being the most, quote unquote, on paper, the most alone and the most solitary that I have ever been in my entire 31 years, quote unquote, years on this earth. And it just didn't make sense, because it's like, you're not supposed to be this happy alone. You're not supposed to be this complete alone. You're supposed to need God. You're supposed to need religion. You're supposed to need society and people and husband and kids and all this. And not that you can't have any of those things, but it felt like it made no logical sense to me that I felt so incredibly complete and full with none of that. And it just blows my mind that all of what I was hoping to get by checking the boxes I was told to check, I could experience all of that now by myself, not dependent on anybody. I used to resist happiness if it was placed in a if-then equation. If I meet this expectation, then I'll be happy. If I'm a good Christian, then I'll get heaven. If I'm a good woman, then I'll get a partner. If I'm a good whatever, then I'll get, fulfillment and wholeness and completeness. And these past couple of days have been blowing my fucking mind, because I have none of the ifs, man. Like, I have none of those ifs. And that does not feel like a problem. And yet somehow I feel so, just so incredibly full. And it makes no sense. And I'm not trying to explain it or to myself. I'm not trying to give myself a reason to be here. I'm just here. And I'm just really appreciative that I could appreciate being here,
I do very well. And I love hearing it because it's genuine. It's not, I found Jesus. Now I'm better because I found Jesus. There's none of that. There's no group think. There's no collective mentality. It's about you and the experience that you're having from moment to moment to moment. And that experience of connection where you just unapologetically cry, if that's what you're experiencing, or sing at the top of your lungs while you're in your car, whatever the fuck it is. It's that fire that you burn with on the inside because you're actually in the experience that you're having. You're actually just fully in it. And that is the purpose. And that is communion, as it were. That's literally the word communion. It's communication. It is fully aligning with reality, which is what God is. And so I want to address this question very quickly, and I'll pass it to Andrew. What do you think about the concept of religion in general? The concept of religion, originally religion was supposed to bind us together, but as an identity, it just rips us apart. So I would say that the reality of religion is what happens when there is none. When each and every person focuses on their individual experience of communion in the same way that Amanda has. So that way, when we come together, we are bound together by the experience of being whole and complete. It has nothing to do with belief.
Well said, because that's just it. And that's exactly what you're expressing, Amanda, too, is like, we have all these boxes. And I was same way growing up, it's like, you get to certain spots, it's always the next thing. Do this to get here, do this to get here, do this to get here. And there's no end to those boxes. Like, there is no end to the amount of boxes that you could possibly check in order to make it or be whole or be complete or whatever. And it's the counterintuitive nature of recognizing that it's not about checking the boxes. It's about letting go of the idea of the boxes meaning anything or getting you anywhere ever. And so as you've recognized, oh, it's not this, I don't need this, I don't need that, I don't need this. It's like you're just left with yourself here and now, and without so many conceptual ideas that you're maintaining about, like, where I should be, what should be happening, all these things society's telling me that, like, as soon as you buy into one, all the others come back in. It's like, oh, I need this. And then it's like, well, if I had this, that would become nice too. And this would add more, and this would add more. And like the moment you think you can add more to the reality of what you are, there is an infinite amount of more that you could possibly add. And so there's no cessation. And that's the experience of hell that we've been talking about, is that the idea that you can get to a spot, like, as soon as the idea that you can get to a spot where you've quote unquote made it, like, you're in hell, you're experiencing hell, because there's no end to that until you recognize that none of those things are it. And people talk about it all the time. It's the famous Jim Carrey quote. I hope everyone discovers their hopes and dreams so they realize it's not the answer. Like, that's that process of, those are boxes. All of my hopes and dreams are all of the boxes, all the things I think I need to do. And, there are people, Jim Carrey checked all of them. He checked all of the ones that he had, and he was like, oh shit, this isn't it. I'm still me here now. And so you can come to the point, and it's not that you have to get to that spot where you check all of them and realize it. It's just recognizing that you're whole as you are, and there aren't any amount of boxes that could add to you, because that's the difference, is like, as soon as you think there's a box that can add to you, you're maintaining a conceptual idea that's value can go up and down, and you're just in the throes of that up and down, as opposed to recognizing the reality of what you are beyond all of the conceptual ideas. And as those fall away, what you're left with is you. And there's nothing, it's not that there's anything telling you that like everything's amazing, your life is incredible. It's just that there's nothing that's telling you otherwise. There's nothing that's telling you that it isn't incredible and amazing. And so you're just kind of sitting there in what it is, and there's nothing taking away from that. So what's left is the fullness. It's the lack of things being pulled away from the wholeness of your experience here now. It's not about adding things to, but as soon as, you know, there's something you can add to relatively, you're pulled from, because you think that's wholeness and you're not there yet. So you couldn't possibly be whole here and now. So it really is the cessation of those boxes, thinking that they could ever possibly add anything to you.
And I remember, you know, if I think back, like when I did check those boxes, it never meant anything, because it was the way and the reason why I wanted that box to be checked that kind of took away from that golden bliss that I was promised. So like thinking about relationships, so like I'm single now, but when I was dating relationships, it was like those relationships weren't working in the way that I expected them to, and I was blaming the partners because they weren't the one, right? So I wasn't with the right one, and so that's why those relationships didn't work. But it's not that; it's that I was using them like an if-then equation. If I'm with the right partner, then I'll be happy. And so if I was not feeling like I was getting that then portion of the equation, like I wasn't happy in those relationships, I was blaming the partner for not being the one. And that was just pushing all the responsibility onto that other partner to be responsible for my feelings and expectations and needs and wants, and expecting someone to prioritize me or the concept of me over them. And I couldn't see that it's no one's responsibility what my feelings are or what my expectations are or what my needs are, whether they're met or not met. That falls on me, because all of that was optional. Like I never had to go into any of those relationships thinking that they needed to do anything for me. You know, I was in a relationship with what I thought I was supposed to be in. I actually wasn't in relationships with those people because I couldn't see beyond the concepts. I couldn't see beyond my thoughts about what things should be or shouldn't be, or my needs, or how the relationship made me look, or whether or not we were going to check other boxes, like getting married and having kids and buying houses. And so I was never dating the men in my life. I was only dating the concept of being in a relationship with them if they could take me to the next box. And that wasn't fair to them or to me. But I don't regret it. And there's very little, if anything, that I do regret, because I appreciate getting caught up. I appreciate getting lost in my own bullshit. And I even appreciate not being present in my relationships. And I mean across the board, talking coworkers, friends, neighbors, families, partners, lovers, one night stands, fucking everybody. No, there was no one that there's none of them that I regret, because now there's an appreciation to be there. And there's that appreciation because we recognize how much we haven't been there in so many ways and in so many layers, both that we've recognized and yet to recognize, because the more I relax, the more I let go of the concept of Amanda, the more is coming up, the more I can see, the more my awareness or perspective can widen, and I can see more and feel more. So there's so much more to learn from those past relationships, from all those times I was caught up. And when I get caught up again, because it's not like it's going to stop, even though I'm in this place, even though I feel so appreciative, I know that there's going to be moments again where we forget all of that. We think about our needs, we get caught up in our character, and that's okay too, because I'm not looking for a destination. I'm not looking for a place to get to, because I kind of enjoy that this moment is always changing. It's always giving me an opportunity to be here, whether I think I like it or not. So it's just, I appreciate not being there in the relationships in a way that I never thought that I could. and in a way that doesn't make me feel shame or guilt for not being there, or doesn't make me want to blame the other partners for them also not being there, because we were in this shit together.
Nice. Well said. Absolutely. I wanted to touch on this quickly because it's important in terms of getting to that state and all of that. It really is in letting go of trying to get to that state. But what does that mean? It means that when you are sitting on your couch alone at home, judging yourself or how you acted through the day, or not doing more with your life, or doing all that stuff, that you don't run from that. See, like if you all of a sudden you hear that thought, like, I'm a piece of shit, you don't run from it. You listen to it, you look at it, and you go, oh, that's based on that concept of me. And you recognize the illusion that it's based on. And there's no other way to go through it. You have to look at it, the thing that you're afraid of, stop running from it, stop trying to cope with it, stop trying to make it go away, and recognize that it's bullshit. Recognize it's bullshit, not tell yourself it's bullshit. That's very different. You have to do the work of recognizing that is based on me needing a false sense of certainty, or a false sense of control, or a false sense of value. That's what those thoughts are based on. They're not actually based on anything else. They're always going to be there, and you need to be able to identify them as not actually being real. That's it. There's no other way around it. This is the toiling. This is the work. This is what actually gets you to that place where these thoughts don't cripple you anymore, because you've actually gained the strength through working through them, rather than just looking for some structure that's going to save you from them. You don't need to be saved. You're not as weak as you perceive yourself to be. Even that is based on some fictitious idea. Everything you think about how hard this is, just take this in, is based on your limited idea of yourself. If you let go of the limited idea, you'd be amazed how easy this gets.
And it was just hitting me how much, because we're caught in the conceptual idea of ourselves, and how focused we are on that. Like we try and do things and try to get to spots, and it's only to build that idea of ourselves. And so without that desire to maintain that idea of ourselves, or think that any of our accomplishments add anything to us, there's not the same amount of desire to get to a spot. Like there isn't the need to get to a place anymore. Like, I don't even know if this is like this in my head. It was like, oh, and so I hope the words are going to come out okay. But because it was hitting me how much when I was growing up, like it was always doing something for the next thing. Like I wanted basically like play sports growing up. Baseball wasn't my favorite sport, admittedly. I liked hockey. I liked golf more. I liked soccer even probably a little bit more at a point. I learned to love it, but it was what I was best at. And I knew that if I could play really well, I could, play Division I and then use it to go to the best school that I could. My dream was always to go to an Ivy League school. And so I was like, all right, let's look at this situation. And like, you basically use my high school experience to get to the best college. And like, why do you do that? Oh, well, to get a better job and to make more money and all of these things that are just adding to a fucking conceptual idea of myself. And like, I did that. I used it to get there. I did enjoy playing when I was in college, and it was a good time, but it was like, I wasn't doing it for the love of it. It was like, I was doing it to get me to the next thing and the best possible thing that I could. And so it's hitting me now, like how little I think about that, like how much of a massive part of my life that was, and how great it felt when I got the acceptance letter, and I was like, holy fuck, this actually is happening, and that did happen, and how little I think about it now. Like I don't even. There's very, very few conversations where anyone even asks me, especially now a job, like, where I went to college. It's not something that gets brought up almost ever. And yet that was like years of my life focused on getting to that spot that now is almost entirely irrelevant. And anytime I would, and I was thinking as you were talking, Amanda, that like, if I were to use that as a way to make myself feel better, like I'm feeling down. I'm like, but you know what? You went to a really good college. And like how much that would just be fucking buying in to the idea of myself. And I was like, holy fuck, like I never do that, but like people do that. And it's just an investment in your idea of yourself every time you do it. And so without that, like it didn't even hit me how little I think about that at all anymore. Because as long as you're focused on that, and you know, that could be involved in someone's fucking positivity affirmations or gratitude practice or whatever, they're not paying attention to reality. And that's where things are happening. That's where the experience you're discussing, Amanda, like the reality of toiling with God happens. So without the maintenance of the ideas that have happened, there isn't so much desire for anything to happen. As soon as you get caught into wanting something that you think is going to add to your idea of yourself, be it, you know, getting a better job, like making more money for the sake of doing so, like getting a really, really nice apartment that's actually functional, but just because it looks really good, or a car, not because you really enjoy cars, but because it looks really good, or getting, you know, more fucking followers or something. Because it every time that comes in, it's building that conceptual idea of yourself that is what causes you to, you know, causes that downfall and causes the suffering to be reinforced and causes you just to not pay attention to reality. Like as long as you're maintaining that idea, you're not actually paying attention to where you're at. And so realizing how little you utilize it, and if you are paying attention to where you're at, like I think the first thought that triggered it was like believers in God, Jesus, whatever, they're not constantly 100% of the time maintaining that. Like I have plenty of friends who are like, they say they're religious, but like when they're involved in a situation, when they're in flow state, they're not thinking about what they fucking believe in. It's only when they settle and they start thinking, usually when they're afraid, they're like, oh, that's kind of scary, but at least I'll end up in heaven with God. Like that's the only time is when they stop paying attention. And so as long as you're paying attention, there isn't the need to maintain that. There isn't the need to fucking set these goals that are going to build the conceptual idea of yourself. It's like doing things because you can, doing things with full fucking enthusiasm. So it's just, it's just hitting me like how little I like give, like I derive from conceptual idea of Andrew and things that have happened in my life. And yet sometimes there's still the pull for things to happen, but it was hitting me like, if I get to that spot, I'm not going to use it to feel better. So like, what's the point of getting to it if I'm not maintaining or trying to maintain an idea now? It's just like ludicrous once you recognize that, because if you run back to feeling better through a conceptual idea of yourself or what you're thinking about or believe in, then it's just going to hinder your ability to pay attention.
And it takes away from your ability to pay attention, but it also takes away from giving yourself any kind of credit. I mean, not credit, but just like your contributions, you know. So I think of my family and I think about how they'll always say like, oh, you know, thank God we couldn't have any of this without God. And I was like, oh, was it God who was pulling the overnight shifts? Was it God that was making sure that when you felt like cooking, you were cooking? And it's like, because they're not having the conversation with me about them being God. So yes, technically God was working those overnight shifts. God was making dinner. Totally. They're not in that mindset. They're thinking that they're completely separate from this God. So they're thinking that God is just like the ultimate puppeteer and they're just this puppet and they have no control over what they're doing. And they're just doing these things as a result of someone else moving them. And it's like, you're not giving yourself any kind of, you're not seeing your contributions to the results, you know. But it's so funny that they do that to themselves, but when it comes to like, let's say my accomplishments, it's we've done so much to help you, Amanda, get you where you are. Right. So I think it's hilarious that they can't acknowledge their own contributions, but they can definitely recognize their contributions to what I've done, to where I've gone, and not recognizing my late nights and my countless asses that I've kissed in both professional and technically not great professional settings. And like, they're not seeing any of that because it doesn't suit their narrative. So when they don't want to take responsibility, it's great to put that on God. But when they do want to take responsibility so they can also try to take ownership and also try to control someone else in their story, then it's, oh no, I did more for you. You couldn't get there without me, but they could get there without them. They only needed God, but I needed them. So it's like they're not even consistent with their logic, but they're so afraid. And when they tell me that they're saved and I see the fear and I can feel it, that they are scared to take one step. They're not even sure where they want to go because they're not even sure they want to be here. And so it just blows my mind that they give this advice vehemently and they're so adamant about what I'm doing wrong and they're not even sure about what they're doing is right. And so it's just watching them and just meeting them where they are, because I get caught up and I still do it. But at least when I'm talking to my family, I'm talking to them, not expecting them to do anything other than what I've seen before. If they surprise me, fantastic. But I don't want to walk into it thinking like I need to teach them, I need to show them, I need to save them from themselves. It's like none of that. It's like, hey, how you been? You want to grab a burger? Let's go grab some lunch. Let's share a moment together, because I'd rather share a moment over a burger and talking about how beautiful the sun feels on us while we're eating that burger outside than trying to convince them that the way that they see things is contributing to their suffering. Now, if they're curious and they ask me a question about like, Amanda, you seem different. What have you been up to? Then I can dive into that. But I'm like, their burden is their creation. And I'm not here to take that away from them, because they'll do it when they're ready. And in the meantime, I can still show up for them. I can still support them without agreeing with them. And it's a good thing, or I guess I perceive it to be good, because it's something that I want to give to them that I don't expect to get back from them, because I usually don't. They disagree with me and they make it very clear that they don't agree, don't approve, don't like, and that I should stop, versus not agreeing and still supporting me. And so I'd rather give them an alternative option that they think doesn't exist. And whether or not they recognize it really is none of my concern, because I'm not doing it for a reason. I'm not doing it to get an end result. I'm doing it because that's what I want to be doing in that moment. And that's kind of the mindset that I take to everything. So when we're anywhere, there's nowhere to get to because we're right here. There's nothing to do except be right here. There's nothing to learn or to get because it's all right here. Anything that I need to focus on is usually wherever I'm at. So if it's not involving where I'm at, then I just ask myself, where are my priorities? Where is my attention? Is it here? Or is it on a concept? Am I trying to make myself feel better? What am I avoiding right here? Because right here is everything I need to focus on. And sometimes that involves family and sometimes it doesn't. But that's what I want to focus on, is where is my attention? And I'm not really concerned where everyone else's attention is, because I can't control that anyway. And whether or not they want to tell me they can control my attention, it's like, good luck. You can barely across the street without freaking out about crossing the street. Am I going to get hit? Is this my last day? What's going on? It's like, just relax, be where you're at. And that's just a good starting point, because I don't know. I'm making wild guesses. I'm fucking running through uncertainty, and yet it doesn't feel like a problem because I'm not making it into a problem. And I don't take it when somebody tries to present me with a problem that they perceive. I can reject, or I don't have to accept it. Because just like I can show them options, they're showing me options, and it's up to me what I choose, like it's up to them.
Well said. Yeah, no, it's so funny how much of that, like everything you're saying, when they say things like, they take responsibility when it makes them feel good, and they pass off responsibility to God when it makes them feel bad. And it's just like, and I think a lot of it's rooted in this idea that we should feel good all the time. Like we think we should. And so when we don't, we think there's something wrong. And so there must be something that needs to be done, as opposed to just relaxing into recognizing that there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be shifts. And it's like that difference between taking responsibility and not taking responsibility. Because it's interesting, like a lot of Christians or believers will pass off that responsibility either way, like when they do something that feels good. But like, I don't know, do they always do that? Because maybe it's just the that they're so wrapped up in needing to believe in that like the belief itself makes them feel good. And so they're willing to pass off when something, good happens. It's like, that's God's responsibility as well, as opposed to recognizing that it's all on you. When you're feeling high, when you're feeling low, it's still your responsibility. And that's like, when you dig into that, you recognize, even when you feel like shit, even when you're caught in a spot that is uncomfortable, like you can kind of walk your way back to like, oh yeah, I got myself to this spot. Like you can start to recognize, and that's that responsibility, but that's what allows you to be free from the throes of your mind and your assumptions, because it's like almost always that desire to feel a little bit better. And so when we feel that uncertainty, we want to feel a little bit better. So we'll just latch on to literally anything, even something that makes us feel long-term, reinforcing that fucking cage, that fucking prison, just because we're like, in the middle of the prison, we're like, oh gosh, I don't know, like everything's uncertain right now. And then we like get to the wall and we're like, oh, okay, I'm in this spot. And that's like the unwillingness to take that responsibility or look beyond just the thing that makes us a tiny bit more comfortable. Like, oh, well, maybe it's this. Okay. And then it's like alleviated for a moment. But when you're actually willing to look, it allows you to like be in that explorative mindset, and the willingness to look at the things that, you're causing harm towards, and the willingness to look at your own involvement in the situation. It allows you to continue to pay attention. And the more you allow that to happen, the less destructive you're going to be, because you're going to be more sensitive to reality. And that's that sort of process of just like unraveling yourself. And a lot of us just bar ourselves from that potential to be free.
Well, we all kind of distort things according to our need to pass the buck, right? Like by my unwillingness to accept that it might just be me. There's this weird distortion that happens. Like I could even still be a responsible person. Okay. So let's just say that I perceive that there is a God. And so I decide, well, I need to act in a way that God would approve of, or I need to act in a godly way. And so right there's this idea that, there's a way that I'm not going to be as destructive. Cool. Right. And so I'm willing to take responsibility for that. I'm willing to take responsibility for my actions, but I'm willing to take my responsibility for my actions in terms of how they will be perceived by God. And so when things go well, I can go, see, that's because I was following God. Right. But when things go badly, oh, God's upset with me. Obviously, I'm doing something wrong. Right. And so there's still almost a level of responsibility, but not, because you're looking at this parental figure rather than just going, oh, wow, that ripple came back hard. Maybe I was keeping my eyes closed on half of that. Right. No, it has to be that God's pissed at me. And it's only just because of that lack of responsibility, that not wanting it to just be you. And so there must be something casting judgment. Otherwise, why would bad things happen? Right? It's like, oh, right, because I'm so caught up in myself, I'm not aware of the ripples that I'm sending out. That's all it is, right? At the end of the day. But it's funny that we can still be responsible in our irresponsibility and perceive it in a way that justifies that it's like, oh, things are going badly, I've upset God. It's like we've never read the book of Job, right? Which is really funny, because that's like a paramount story in the Bible, how Job was completely and utterly committed to God. And so God's kind of hanging with his angel buddies, and he's like, look at Job down there kicking ass, loving me, loving his life, fucking living a godly existence. One of the other angels, and they refer to him as Satan, but it just means adversary. It's all it meant. It says like the person who contradicts, the dick in the crowd. He's like, right, okay, so Job loves you, but that's just because things are going well. God's like, nah, fuck that. Watch this. And so he just fucks with Job. Like he just makes his life super hard, and Job loses everything. Like things get fucking brutal for Job. He's lost everything he loves, his health, his happiness, his family, his fortune. Fuck, it's all gone. And Job nonetheless carries on with his commitment to God, which just means his commitment to himself in the present moment, right? And then at the end of the story, all of a sudden everything comes back to Job, and like tenfold. And why? Because Job never asked for it. He never looked for it. He wasn't trying to get there. He went through the discomfort because he saw that there was a purpose to it. There was a responsibility to it, right? He wasn't sitting there going, God hates me. There was a period in the story where he's like, am I being punished? But then he snapped out of that shit, right? Because that's the whole point. Why would God punish itself? It's just the ebb and flow of the tide. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's like he didn't have a story. He wasn't telling himself a story as he went. Like that's all that it is. Like, of course, like you continue paying attention to reality and going through those experiences, and whether it's, you know, a perceived difficult time or a perceived enjoyable time, like if you're not telling yourself a story, it is what it is. And like, what's the alternative? Really, like you start getting thrown shit. Like, what's the alternative? It's like, this is what it is. Like your story is irrelevant. Your story is just going to take you out of the ability to handle how much needs to be involved in the situation. Like all that you do by telling yourself a story, by thinking that something shouldn't be happening the way that it is cut that attention down. Like is take energy out of what energy could be placed into the situation that you're having. Like when you come at it from a logical point of view, it's crazy to tell yourself any story about anything. And, you know, obviously we're constantly doing it. I tell myself stories all the fucking time, but like it's absurd. Like it only takes from it, but like it's like an investment. We're willing to like, oh, I don't know what this means. I don't actually know if this is a good or a bad thing to be happening. I don't know what the next step of this is going to be. I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Like in order to avoid that, we take away from the energy that we would be able to apply to the situation that they're in. It's like an absurd payment because like it doesn't actually give you anything. It just takes away from you. But because that uncertainty is so overwhelming to you because you think it's possible to not experience it, you think you can avoid it, and you make that trade-off. Whereas if you just continued to not tell yourself a story, you'd be able to handle things so much better than you can when you are telling yourself that story.
See, that's funny. It's funny because what you're saying, and this is true to an extreme degree. All of this being reality is really tough. So I'm going to take a break and believe the sun's coming up tomorrow.
But would you be there to see the sun come up tomorrow if it did, or if it didn't? Like it's just another story. And I was thinking when you guys were talking about, you know, how believers don't always take responsibility, except when it's like they're responsible for a punishment or a perceived consequence. And then they take ownership of the consequence of their quote unquote choice because it's not what they expected. It's now an issue. Like the if then equation didn't work. That must mean that I put in the wrong variables. And it's like, maybe the equation is something to let go of. Maybe it's not about the variables. Maybe it doesn't matter what's if then, like that you could put anything there and it could still feel incomplete, but just letting go of the story that you need there to be something that precedes wholeness, something that precedes being here. But they just only want to take ownership when it just serves the story, and the story likes those low points because that feels more legitimate. Like to feel when I perceive that I'm having a low day, that adds more to the story of Amanda than when I'm not concerned about a low point. When I'm not concerned about a consequence, it's easy to forget about the separation that I feel in the character of Amanda. But when I was sitting on the floor with that cat, we weren't thinking about Amanda. We weren't thinking about living alone. We weren't thinking about family, friends, partners, kids, lack of work, goals, dualistic unity. We weren't thinking about anything other than being exactly where we were. And that's what just felt so incredibly full, was the fact that I didn't need to change it. There was no perceived issue. There was no perceived lack. There was nowhere else I wanted to be. There was nothing else I wanted to do. There was no one I wanted to be in that room with me other than what was there already. And that was more full. But that, in one way, I rejected it on the way home because I just thought, I'm not supposed to be without stories. All I hear are stories nonstop. Everywhere I look, there's another fucking story. So to have a moment where you weren't in a story almost felt strange because of all of the conditioning that I take on. And it's so funny. I was talking to a friend, maybe last night or the night before, and I was saying that in order to take something personally, there has to be a person to take it. And if there's no Amanda, right? If there's no Amanda to be offended, then there's no offense being taken. If there's no Amanda, if there's no story to be crushed or lifted or taken down, then that doesn't happen. For you to take something personally means that you agree that there's a person that fits that story. But if there's no story, if there's no person, then there's nothing we're taking other than what's already here, which is everything that you are and everything that we can experience in that moment, whatever that may be.
Well said. I just wanted to make a mention of something that you mentioned there, like, after 2000 plus years of trying this specific calculation or strategy or formula, maybe it's time to go back to the drawing board.
Exactly. Right. Like, it's funny how we're in a spot right now, and yet we're like just doubling and tripling down on the things that we've always done. Like, as opposed to taking a step back and being like, maybe I don't know. Maybe all this stuff is bullshit. Maybe there's another way you can live. And I think that, like, that for me was the case. Like, when I started to dig into, anything, getting into this conversation, the recognition that maybe the thoughts I'm holding on to aren't the truth. Maybe my mind doesn't always say what the truth is. Maybe it's always just making assumptions. Like, you start questioning that and you're like, oh, like there's gotta be another way to live. Like, that was my initial sort of thing going through suffering, caught in my mind, like thinking that all of it is real. All of it is very, very real. Like, not even recognizing that there could be an experience where I'm not hypothesizing about, the future and going through all of these hypothetical situations. And it just hit me like, there's got to be another way. Might as well start exploring, might as well try to figure it out. And that was like, 6 or 7 years ago. And it just, as long as you keep going through that, like, you'll inevitably hit ups and downs. And if you're willing to maintain that curiosity of like, there's got to be more here, like this thing that I've settled upon, maybe that isn't the case. Maybe that isn't the case. And just continuing on through that uncertainty, like, inevitably you get to the spot where you recognize, like, you're not what you think. Like, there's a lot of things that are building that idea to get through. But as soon as you get to the spot where you're like, oh, none of the ideas, none of the things that I think are true, are ever actually a truth. Like, it's a lot tougher for them to stick onto anything anymore. But it's just that curiosity, like that incessant curiosity of like, there's got to be something else. And yet, as a society, we've just settled in so many ways, and we're unwilling to question the fabric of it, because we just get a twang of discomfort when we start to, and we go running in the opposite direction.
Yeah, because our societal pastime is avoiding suffering. Like, that's really the big issue that everybody's got. You'll notice this to some degree or another. The argument is, but suffering. Like, yeah, that's, kind of part of the duality of our life. It's kind of like somebody complaining about, salty as opposed to sweet, right? It's like, oh my God, there's salty everywhere. It's like, yeah, doesn't mean you have to always be in it. Like, you can have some of the sweet too. Like, they complement one another, right? But that's the problem, is that people wander around, and this is why you'll get pamphlets in the mail all the time, Watchtower and shit like that. Why does God allow suffering? It's like, for who? Because I'm pretty sure it's just God experiencing it, right? Like you seem to be thinking like God's up there like a kid with a magnifying glass, and some ants roasting us like, this is fun. They're suffering, and it's like God is the ants. And the reason for that is the experience and all the other shit that's, all of a sudden so much better because of that possibly terrifying experience. Like there's all kinds to the duality, but we just want to make it simple. Like suffering shouldn't exist. Well, why? Because I don't like it. Oh, okay. Well, if that's your whole reason, well, shit, I'm on board, right? And there's no thought about it in the same way that in religion, there is no actual introspection. It's very little in terms of there being self-reflection or accountability or responsibility. It's just about being in the right line so that way you get to the right place after you die. That's really all it is. Which line do I get into? Oh, that one's going to fire and brimstone, and this one's going to the pearly gates. I'm going to get in this one. Right. And that's all it comes down to, despite the fact that nobody's ever seen the fire and brimstone or the pearly gates. I really want to emphasize this, that all of these Christians who are afraid of heaven and hell have never seen either. And they're really banking on it in the same way that kids bank on Santa coming for Christmas. It's the exact same thing. And there's going to be the same disappointment when they grow up enough to realize that it's fiction. If they grow up, they can cling to that myth their entire life and do the whole deathbed repentance thing and terror and fear right up until the moment that this life ends. And then that's the end of it. That's the funny part about it. They're like, oh no, the after, and then that's it. There's nothing there. There's nothing to worry about because there's no more you to bitch about it, right? That's the whole nice thing, is that reality continues on. Nothing happens. There's nothing to fear, right? Everybody has it wrong. It's all based on this fiction. Everybody's looking at it from an entirely biased, confused point of view, instead of doing the work to get out of the way and realize, right, if I break down all the things I'm afraid of, fuck, there's just what is. That's all there is. Oh, so when people are like, what happens after you die? Same thing that's happening now. Everything. That's it. Isn't that fun? That's it. Eternal life. What does that mean? It means life eternally. It doesn't mean that you are going to die and go somewhere else. There is nowhere else. It's all here now. It's just infinite here now. Where are you trying to go? That's all. And once you recognize that and you allow yourself to sit in it for a while, you start to recognize that what all of these people like Jesus and Buddha were talking about had nothing to do with religion and nothing to do with belief. They were just trying to give you a way to get the fuck out of your own way. That's all they were trying to do. And unfortunately, they did it in a way that other people misunderstood, that we misunderstand, because we're biased and afraid and looking for an end result. So as soon as I say something about God, you're like, I got to get there. It's like, fuck, like you're missing it because you're trying to get somewhere that doesn't exist except in the concept that you just created when I use the word God. And that's the difference. Stop trying to get to the concept and you'll recognize the reality. And that's where freedom is. That's where your connection to everything is, in the reality of what you are, not in the thought. And that's faith and humility, which is hilarious because Christians talk about faith and humility all the time while judging everybody who's not a Christian and worrying about not living up to some fictitious rule created by God, which is funny. I wanted to mention to everybody that we're going to be continuing on in 20-ish minutes on Patreon for an hour tier 2 conversation, then a 2-hour tier 3 conversation, which are always the best because we get super fucking deep. If you would like to join us, we would love to see you. I want to say, Amanda, thank you so much for joining us for today's segment of Raw. This has been a blast. We look forward to having you again next month for another segment because this is something we're going to make more regular.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I am so glad to be here and glad and excited to continue on this journey of not settling, which is what religion tries to give you a place. You can settle here, but only if you meet our requirements. And we say, fuck that. Let's not settle. Let's continue to go. And I appreciate sharing that journey with all of you.
Amen. Amen. Just the continued process, not willing to settle on fucking jack shit. Keeping our eyes open to what is, our eyes open to the reality of ourselves. All we can ever do. So yeah, this has been a blast, Amanda. Always love chatting with you, and looking forward to the next 3 hours of chatting as well. Cause yeah, I want to get into that conceptual idea. Like as soon as you take one concept to be the truth, they're all the truth, and reality is no longer the truth. And so if you're talking about concepts, not recognizing that they're not the truth, you're not even going to be able to, there's like a wall. You say you're God concept, that's what they run with, because they don't recognize that the concept is never it. Like as soon as the twang of any concept being the truth comes in, they're all the truth. So.
Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? Absolutely. The reality is what's awe-inspiring, because the reality is what actually makes you stop and look without settling on an assumption, because it's too much to settle on such a simple assumption. It's too big for you to go, oh, that's this. And that's when you're actually seeing it, right? And then you take a break and you go, it's this. And we all go, oh, and we all kind of sit on that plateau with you for a bit before moving on, because that's the point, is that the concept, the insight isn't the point. It's the journey that led you to it. Now you're taking a break, chewing on the insight. But once you continue on, the insight changes into something else, which is the point. So thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you in 15 minutes on patreon.com/dualistic unity. If you can't join us there, do join us Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern time for a free group chat. You can register at dualisticunity.com. Take care, everyone.